We don't rescue people after the third sunset. Every SAR team has a public motto about never leaving anyone behind. It's a necessary lie we tell the families. Our real unwritten protocol is the one that keeps us alive. After the third sunset, the search is over. Because whatever you find in the dark out here after that, you'd best hope it doesn't find you first. The radio crackled to life with a sound like frying bacon, slicing through the drowsy afternoon quiet of the ranger station. I was halfway through logging a trail maintenance report, the kind of mundane paperwork I'd imagined I was leaving behind, when I traded a detective shield for a park ranger's flat hat. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, professional, but underneath it hummed the familiar urgency that always signals the start of a very bad day for someone. All units, be advised, we have a 211 in progress, Sector 4, missing person. A 211 was a hiker usually, someone who'd misjudged the trail, the weather, or their own abilities. My partner for the rotation, David Akecheta, didn't even look up from the knife he was sharpening. He just drew the whetstone along the blade with a steady, rhythmic rasp, the sound a counterpoint to the static on the radio. David moved with an economy of motion that made him seem a permanent part of the landscape, like the granite peaks that clawed at the sky outside our window. 10 minutes later, we were standing in Chief Ranger Maya Singh's office, the incident command post already buzzing to life around us. Maps of the park's sprawling, indifferent wilderness were unfurled across the main table, topographic lines writhing like tangled snakes. Maya, sharp and focused, pointed to a red circle marking the Black Creek trailhead. Liam O'Connell, 21 years old, she began, her voice cutting through the noise. College kid from the city, out for a day hike yesterday. Car's still in the lot, phone goes straight to voicemail. His roommate reported him overdue this morning. It was a textbook scenario, the kind they drill into you at the academy. A lone hiker, probably underprepared, swallowed by a few 100,000 acres of badlands and old-growth forest. Okay, people, let's get this stood up, Maya commanded. Ground teams will establish grids starting from the last known point at the trailhead. Air support is 5 mics out. Carter, you're with Akecheta on grid Alpha 7. We're in the golden window, folks. Let's use it. The 72-hour window. It was the first, most critical lesson of any search and rescue operation. The first 3 days are when you have the highest probability of finding someone alive. After that, the curve on the survival chart takes a nosedive. Dehydration, exposure, injury. The wilderness is patient, but it doesn't wait forever. It was a cold, statistical reality, a problem to be solved with manpower, methodology, and relentless logic. It was a language I understood. Out on the trail, the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. David moved ahead of me, not with speed, but with a quiet purposefulness, his eyes scanning everything from the forest floor to the canopy above. He missed nothing. I had my GPS out, my eyes locked on the digital grid lines, ensuring our sweep was precise. Liam! My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the immense silence between the trees. Liam O'Connell, can you hear me? We repeated the call every 100 yards, a practiced, hollow shout into the void. Above, the rhythmic whump, whump, whump of the helicopter's rotors beat against the mountainside, a mechanical heartbeat in the wild. Hours bled into one another. The work was grueling, a monotonous cycle of walking, watching, and shouting. My old detective instincts kicked in, and I found myself searching for clues, a broken branch, a scuff mark on a rock, anything out of place. But the forest held its secrets close. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, David stopped. He wasn't looking at his watch or his GPS. He was staring west, watching the shadows of the great pines stretch and lengthen across the valley floor like grasping fingers. "Sun's getting low," he said, his voice quiet. It wasn't a casual observation. There was a weight to his words I couldn't quite decipher. "We've got another hour of good light," I countered, checking the time. "We can clear the next subgrid before heading back." David slowly turned his gaze from the horizon to me. His eyes, dark and deep, held a stillness that was unnerving. "The light's one thing," he said, his voice barely a murmur. "The time is another. This place starts calling in its debts once the light gets thin." I must have looked confused because he just gave a slight shake of his head and turned back toward the trail leading out. He didn't explain, he just started walking, and I knew the discussion was over. It sounded like the kind of cryptic folklore you'd expect from an old-timer, a poetic way of saying, "It gets dangerous after dark." I filed it away as a regional quirk and followed, the methodical grid in my head already planning our approach for day 2, certain that with enough time and logic, every missing person could be found. Day 2 dawned cold and sharp, the air so clean it felt like breathing ice. The optimism of the first 24 hours had evaporated with the morning mist, replaced by a grim, methodical resolve. We were no longer looking for a lost hiker. We were racing the clock against exposure and the unforgiving calculus of human physiology. Maya's briefing was concise, her voice tight. The search area was expanding, the probability statistics were being recalculated, and the faces of the volunteer searchers were beginning to show the strain. 48 hours down, 24 to go. David was quieter than the day before, if that was even possible. While I checked our comms and recalibrated my GPS, he stood by the truck, watching the eastern ridgeline ignite with the sunrise. He seemed to be measuring the day, weighing it before it had even begun. We were assigned a new grid, a nasty piece of terrain that spilled down into a ravine choked with manzanita and scree. It was the kind of place where you could break an ankle just by looking at it too hard. Hours of pushing through dense brush and shouting Liam's name yielded nothing. The sun climbed, hot and relentless, and the only response was the chatter of jays and the endless drone of insects. Then, just after noon, the radio squawked. It was another team working the grid adjacent to ours. "Command, this is Grid Charlie 4. We've got something. It's subject's gear, we think, but the placement is odd. Requesting a secondary unit to confirm and document." Maya's voice came back, steady as ever. "Copy, Charlie 4. Hold your position. Alpha 7, you're closest. Proceed to their coordinates and advise." We diverted, scrambling over a saddleback ridge. We found the other team, a pair of volunteers standing around a clearing, their expressions a mixture of confusion and unease. In the center of a large, flat slab of granite, swept clean by the wind, were 3 items: a Nalgene water bottle, a high-end compass, and a single, unlaced hiking boot. They weren't scattered as if they'd fallen from a tumbling pack. They were placed, arranged in a perfectly straight line, each object spaced what looked to be exactly a yard apart. My detective brain went into overdrive, trying to assemble a narrative. Signaling, I thought. He's trying to leave a trail, make himself seen from the air. But it made no sense. Why not use something reflective? Why waste a perfectly good boot? Why the obsessive neatness? Someone in a state of panic or delirium doesn't create right angles and precise measurements. Could an animal have done this? One of the volunteers asked, his voice hushed. I shook my head. A bear would have chewed on the bottle. A raccoon or a bird might move the compass, but not like this. This is deliberate. I looked to David for his input. He wasn't looking at the items. He had his back to them, his gaze fixed on the position of the sun, now high overhead. His jaw was clenched tight. He walked to the edge of the granite slab, knelt, and touched the ground, letting the dry dirt run through his fingers. He wasn't looking for tracks. He was feeling something else. "What do you think?" I pressed, pulling out my camera to document the scene. He stood up, brushing the dust from his hands. "I think he's not the one leaving the markers anymore." He finally looked at the objects, his eyes sweeping over them with a kind of weary resignation. The old-timer's clock runs different out here, Ben. It's not about hours. It's about how much light you got left in your pocket. Before I could ask him to clarify the bizarre statement, he'd already keyed his mic. Command, this is a Ketchita. We've confirmed the items. Documented. There's nothing else here. We're continuing our sweep. The rest of the afternoon was a tense, silent affair. Every rock and shadow seemed to hold a new significance. The deliberate placement of those items had changed the equation. This wasn't just a man against nature anymore. There was another variable, an unknown intelligence, and it felt like it was watching us, toying with us. As the sun began its inevitable slide toward the western peaks, David's strange vigilance intensified. He'd stop mid-stride, cocking his head as if listening for a sound I couldn't hear, his eyes constantly tracking the angle of the light slanting through the trees. His focus had shifted completely from the ground to the sky. He was no longer a searcher. He was a sentry. The morning of the third day felt like a funeral. The crisp, clean air of the previous dawn had been replaced by a low-hanging overcast that bled all the color from the landscape, leaving behind a world of grays and muted greens. At the incident command post, the frenetic energy was gone. In its place was the quiet, grim bureaucracy of a recovery mission. The survival probability charts on the whiteboard now showed single-digit percentages. The language shifted from locating the subject to recovering the remains. It was a necessary emotional detachment, a clinical process I understood from my years as a detective, but out here, surrounded by the silent, watching mountains, it felt profoundly different. It felt like a concession. Maya briefed us with a face carved from stone. The search area was being condensed, focusing on high-probability zones for a body, ravines, creek beds, and dense thickets. The volunteers were being reassigned to less hazardous areas, a quiet acknowledgement that the risk was no longer justified by the hope of a rescue. We were going out for one final push, a last sweep before the operation was officially suspended. As I was loading my pack, checking my gear with a mechanical focus, David approached. He didn't say a word, just gave a slight jerk of his head toward the back of the station, away from the grim-faced teams preparing to deploy. I followed him behind a large equipment shed, the air smelling of gasoline and cold steel. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable, the overcast sky reflecting in his dark eyes. "Today's the last day," he said. It wasn't a question. "Looks that way," I replied, my voice flat. "Well, give it hell until dusk." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "No, we give it hell until the sun starts to touch the ridgeline. Then we're out, all of us." He paused, letting the words settle. "We are out of the back country before the third sunset. Not after, not during, before, no exceptions." I stared at him, my frustration from the past 2 days finally bubbling to the surface. His cryptic comments about the sun and the light, the strange resignation at the arranged gear, it all coalesced into this. "What are you talking about, David? That's not the protocol. The protocol is to use all available light to maximize search time." "That's the official protocol," he countered, his voice low but unyielding. "I'm telling you the one that matters, the one that's not in the manual." "So what, we just give up?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because of some old-timer's superstition? Because the sun is going down on the third day? Liam O'Connell is out there. Even if the chances are 1 in a million, we have a duty to take it." My words, full of the righteous certainty I'd built my entire career on, seemed to have no effect on him. He didn't get angry. He didn't try to argue. He just looked at me with a profound, almost sorrowful weariness, like a man explaining gravity to someone who insists on floating away. "This isn't about giving up, Ben," he said softly. "This is about understanding the terms. We get 3 days. That's the grace period. After the third sunset, it's no longer a search and rescue. It's a territorial dispute, and we lose." I felt a cold prickle crawl up my spine, a reaction my logical mind couldn't suppress. A dispute with what? He held my gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, filled only by the distant murmur of the command post. He wasn't going to answer. He didn't have to. The truth of his conviction was more powerful than any explanation. "The park is a patient place," he said finally, turning to leave. "It gives you a chance to get your own back. But what the park doesn't give back by the third sunset, it intends to keep." He walked away, leaving me standing in the shadow of the shed. His words hung in the damp air, a direct contradiction to everything I knew, to every procedure I had ever followed. It was an unwritten rule, born of folklore and fear, and it felt more absolute than any regulation stamped in a government manual. David's words echoed in my head, a dissonant hum beneath the organized chaos of the final day's deployment. "It intends to keep." The phrase was nonsensical, a line from a ghost story told around a campfire, not a principle of modern search and rescue. As a detective, I dealt with grim realities and human monsters, but they all operated within the known laws of physics and psychology. This was something else entirely, a deliberate injection of mysticism into a life or death equation, and it offended every logical fiber of my being. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was dangerous. People were abandoning a search for a ghost story. My anger simmered, hot and clear. I found Maya Singh near the communications tent, her face illuminated by the green glow of a monitor displaying weather patterns. The air was electric with the low thrum of the generator. "Chief Singh, I need a word," I said, keeping my voice level, despite the frustration churning in my gut. She turned, her eyes already tired. "What is it, Carter?" "It's about Senior Ranger Akacheta," I began, choosing my words carefully. "He's given me a direct, non-protocol order. He's insisting that all units pull out of the backcountry before sunset, regardless of operational status. He's citing local beliefs." I let the last two words hang in the air, weighted with my skepticism. I expected a flicker of annoyance, a promise to have a word with David, a reaffirmation of official procedure. Instead, Maya's expression became guarded. She studied my face for a long, silent moment, her gaze so intense it felt like she was reading the fine print of my soul. She seemed to come to a decision. "My office," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I followed her back to the main station, my mind racing through disciplinary procedures and formal complaints. She walked past her desk, went straight to the door, and turned the heavy deadbolt. The thunk of the lock echoed in the small room, a sound of finality that sent a chill through me. This was no longer a professional disagreement. This was something else. Without a word, she went to a tall steel filing cabinet, the kind used for sensitive documents, and spun the dial of a combination lock. From the back of a drawer, she retrieved a thick, worn manila folder, bound with a faded red ribbon. There were no labels on the outside, just a single, stark date from a decade ago. She placed it on the desk between us. "You were a detective, Carter," she said, her voice low. "You know how to read a file. You know how to see what's there, and more importantly, what isn't." I untied the ribbon and opened the folder. The first page was a standard incident report, but it was a sea of black. Thick, dark lines of redaction obliterated most of the text. Names, locations, timelines, all of it was gone. Only a few words remained, stark islands in an ocean of ink. SAR operation, multi-agency, missing, family of 4. I flipped through the pages. It was all there, same. Witness statements, operational logs, equipment manifests, all rendered meaningless by the censor's heavy hand. My training screamed at me. This wasn't just classifying information. This was a complete burial. This was the kind of file you create when you need a disaster to have never officially happened. Then I reached the final summary report, the official document for the public record. It was mostly intact. It detailed the search for the Jacobson family, who had vanished from a campsite 10 years prior. It listed the names of the 8 members of the elite SAR team sent in after them, and at the bottom, under Conclusion, was the official finding. Incident concluded on day 4, I read aloud, my voice a hollow whisper. All 12 subjects located, deceased. Cause of death determined by coroner as drowning and blunt force trauma consistent with a flash flood event in the canyon. My blood ran cold. I looked up at Maya, my skepticism finally cracking. A flash flood? In August? This region has been in a drought cycle for 20 years. Maya's eyes never left mine. She reached into the file and pulled out a single, unredacted sheet of paper I had missed. It was the official meteorological report from the National Weather Service for the week of the incident. 4 days of clear skies, low humidity, and 0 precipitation. The file lay open on the desk, a testament to an official, impossible lie. 8 of the best SAR operators in the state, plus a family of 4, hadn't been killed by a flood that never happened. They had gone into the park, stayed past the third sunset, and had been kept. The redacted file wasn't a cover-up of a mistake. It was a containment protocol, a wall of ink built around a truth so unthinkable that the only alternative was a lie everyone knew was false. Some rules are written in the manual, Maya said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the generator. The important ones are written on the land itself. David is just trying to make sure you know how to read them. The weight of that redacted file settled in my bones, a cold, heavy thing that leached the strength from my limbs. Throughout the last day's search, I moved with a hollowed-out purpose, my eyes no longer scanning for a lost student but for something else. Every shadow seemed to coalesce. Every gust of wind through the pines sounded like a whisper. David's words and Maya's silent confirmation had fractured the world I knew, leaving behind a landscape where the rules of logic were as broken as the terrain under my boots. We were working a high ridgeline, a granite spine that offered a panoramic view of the park's brutal, beautiful emptiness. The sun, a bloated orange disk, was bleeding out across the horizon. Its light, thin and weak, did little to warm the air. David stood beside me, not looking at the ground but at the sun itself, as if watching a timer count down to 0. The radio on my chest harness remained silent. No one had found anything. The 72 hours were up. Then, Maya's voice, devoid of all emotion, crackled through the speaker. All units, ICP, time is 1900. The 3rd day is concluded. Stand down from SAR operations. I repeat, all personnel stand down and return to base. Acknowledge. One by one, the team leaders checked in, their voices flat with exhaustion and defeat. Charlie 4, copy. Bravo 2, acknowledged. David keyed his mic. Alpha 7, copy. We're en route. He turned to me, his face a mask in the dying light. Let's go, Ben. The day's over. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We began to pack our gear, the metallic click of carabiners and the rustle of nylon, the only sounds breaking the profound stillness. This was it. We were leaving him. Whether Liam O'Connell was dead or alive, we were walking away because a clock that no one could see had struck an hour that no one had set. The thought was a bitter acid in my stomach. As I shouldered my pack, I took one last look out over the vast network of canyons below, now filling with deep purple shadows, like a basin filling with ink. And then I saw it. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, a flicker, deep in the throat of Dead Horse Canyon, a place aptly named and notoriously difficult to access. It wasn't a reflection. It blinked, paused, and then blinked again. It was weak, intermittent, but it was unmistakably a light. A headlamp, a phone screen, a signal. David, I said, my voice hoarse. I pointed. Look! Down there! He followed my finger, his body going rigid. He saw it too. For a heartbeat, I felt a surge of vindicated triumph. See? Logic. Evidence. A person is alive down there. We were wrong to stop. But David's reaction was not one of hope. It was one of pure, undiluted dread. He took a single step back from the edge of the ridge, physically recoiling. "No," he breathed, shaking his head. "No." "What do you mean, no?" I demanded, turning on him, the adrenaline singing in my veins. "That's him. That has to be him. He's alive, David. We have to call it in." I reached for my radio, but his hands shot out and clamped down on my wrist, his grip like steel. "You will do nothing," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl I had never heard before. "We are leaving, now." "Are you insane?" I ripped my arm from his grasp. "There is a human being signaling for help, and you want to walk away because of some ghost story in a file? I became a ranger to save people, not to abandon them to the dark." "That isn't a person anymore," David said, his eyes wild with a certainty that terrified me more than the darkness. "That's a lure. The grace period is over. It's fishing." His words didn't compute. All I could see was that light, a fragile beacon of life in an ocean of encroaching blackness. All I could think of was Liam O'Connell, injured, freezing, his last bit of battery power fading away. My duty, my entire identity, was a singular, screaming command in my head. "Go." I stared at David, at the absolute, immovable conviction on his face. He would stop me. He would physically restrain me if he had to. So I did the only thing I could. I lied. I let my shoulders slump, the picture of defeat. "Okay," I sighed, the word tasting like ash. "You're right. Let's go." He watched me for a moment longer, searching my face for any sign of defiance. I held his gaze, forcing myself to look beaten. Finally, he nodded curtly and turned to lead the way down the trail. I followed him for 50 yards, my heart hammering against my ribs. When we rounded a thicket of scrub oak that briefly obscured the path, I made my move. I stopped, knelt down as if to tie my boot, and let him get ahead. The moment he was out of sight, I scrambled off the trail, moving as silently as I could. I slipped my primary radio off its harness and buried it under a rock. In the gathering dark, I grabbed my day pack, my headlamp, and a length of climbing rope. Every instinct I had, forged over a decade of chasing down facts and saving lives, screamed that this was the right thing to do. The only thing to do. Alone, with the last vestiges of sunset swallowed by the mountains, I started my descent into the waiting maw of Dead Horse Canyon, chasing a flicker of light, defying an order I finally understood, in a danger I couldn't possibly comprehend. The descent into Dead Horse Canyon was a controlled fall in the dark. Loose scree shifted under my boots, sending cascades of pebbles skittering into the abyss, their sounds swallowed by the oppressive silence. My world shrank to the bouncing, finite circle of my headlamp beam. My breath rasped in my ears, a frantic counterpoint to the steady, methodical blink of the light below. It was still there, a patient, pulsing ember in the suffocating blackness. Every step down was an act of defiance, a rejection of David's superstitions and Maya's silent warnings. I was a professional, and that light was a life. It took me the better part of an hour to reach the canyon floor. The air was cold and still, heavy with the smell of wet stone and decay. I swept my beam across the narrow wash, revealing a litter of pale, skeletal driftwood and water-scoured boulders. And there it was. Propped against a sheer rock face was a blue osprey backpack, Liam O'Connell's. Next to it, on a flat stone, sat his headlamp, its lens dark and inert. The blinking light I had followed, the beacon that had drawn me down here, was now 100 yards further into the canyon, winking at me from behind a bend in the rock wall. A cold dread, sharp and logical, cut through my adrenaline. "It's fishing," David had said. "The pack was the bait. The light was the hook. My training took over, pushing the fear down. This was a crime scene, a trap. "Liam?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Liam O'Connell, this is Park Ranger Carter. I'm here to help." Silence. Not even the chirp of a cricket. The canyon held its breath. The light ahead blinked once, twice, and then went out. My own beam felt pitifully small. I waited. A minute stretched into an eternity. Then from the darkness where the light had been, a voice called back. "Liam O'Connell, this is Park Ranger Carter. I'm here to help." It was my own voice. Not an echo, distorted and delayed by the rock walls. It was a perfect, crystal-clear recording, played back with my exact inflection, my exact cadence. It was as if I were standing 100 yards away, speaking the same words at the same time. The sheer impossibility of it short-circuited my brain. My blood turned to ice water. I fumbled for the sidearm on my hip, the cold steel a useless comfort against something that could wear my voice like a mask. I began to back away slowly, my feet crunching on the gravel. I didn't turn my back on the darkness. Then came the whisper. It was faint at first, a sibilant hiss that slithered out of the blackness, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't in my voice this time. It was a collage, a tapestry of sound woven from the fabric of my own memory. "You should have checked the brakes, Ben." It was the voice of my father, sharp with the phantom smell of motor oil and regret. A memory from a garage 20 years ago, the day my brother crashed his first bike. My stomach lurched. How? I stumbled backward, my headlamp beam shaking wildly. The whispers grew louder, clearer, winding around me. I heard the desperate plea of a woman from a domestic violence call I'd taken as a detective, a case that had ended badly. I heard the thin, reedy sound of my own childhood cry after falling from a tree. It was a curator of my personal hell, playing a highlight reel of every failure, every fear, every moment of shame I had ever experienced. I turned and ran. I scrambled over boulders, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. The thing didn't pursue me with footsteps or snapping jaws. It pursued me with my own life. It wasn't hunting my body, it was dismantling my mind. "Why didn't you come sooner?" It was a voice I didn't recognize, choked with sobs. It was the sound of my own failure. I reached the base of the canyon wall and began to climb, my fingers raw, my muscles screaming in protest. The whispering followed, coiling up from the canyon floor. It didn't shout, it didn't have to. It spoke with the intimate knowledge of a confessor, laying my soul bare in the crushing dark. The light flickered back on below me, pacing my ascent, a single, mocking eye. My foot slipped. I slammed against the rock face, the impact driving the air from my lungs. For a terrifying second, I dangled by the tips of my fingers, my legs kicking at empty air. The whispering stopped. And in the sudden, absolute silence, a new voice spoke, clear and calm, right beside my ear. It was Maya's. Some rules are written on the land itself. The shock of it, the cold, factual delivery, gave me a surge of pure terror that was stronger than my exhaustion. With a guttural cry, I found a new handhold, hauled myself up, and clawed my way over the lip of the canyon. I didn't stop. I ran, blindly, crashing through brush and tripping over roots, fleeing the thing that knew me better than I knew myself, until the only sound left was the frantic, terrified drumming of my own heart. I don't remember much of the journey back. It was a blur of stumbling through the pre-dawn gloom, of branches tearing at my skin and clothes, of the whispers from the canyon finally fading behind me, replaced by the ringing in my own ears. I didn't navigate by compass or by stars. I just moved away from the canyon, away from that hollow place, propelled by a primal instinct to reach the light. My body ran on the last dregs of adrenaline, a machine operating on fumes, but my mind was a vacant, echoing chamber. The thing in the dark hadn't just scared me, It had scooped me out. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks with a delicate, mocking pink when the ranger station came into view. It looked like a photograph from another life, a sanctuary of order and reason that I no longer had the right to enter. I must have been a sight, covered in dirt and scratches, my uniform torn, my face a pale mask of exhaustion. The front door opened before I reached it. David Akecheta stood in the doorway, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry. His expression was one of profound, somber recognition, the look a doctor gives you when the tests confirm the worst. Behind him, in the warm light of her office, I could see Maya Singh standing by her desk. They had been waiting. They knew I'd go, and they knew I'd come back like this, if I came back at all. There were no questions. No, I told you so. No recriminations for my insubordination. The silence was absolute, filled only with the unspoken truth of what I had found in the dark. It was a shared, terrible knowledge that needed no words. David simply stepped aside and let me pass. The smell of brewing coffee, so normal and comforting just a day ago, now seemed alien and thin. I walked into Maya's office and sank into the chair opposite her desk without being asked. My limbs felt like they were filled with lead. Maya's gaze was steady, not of pity, but of assessment. She was gauging the damage, checking to see how much of the man who had charged into her office, demanding answers, was still left. She slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood of her desk. It was the final incident report for the search of Liam O'Connell. It was typed, neat, and official. I read the summary, my eyes struggling to focus on the sterile, bureaucratic language. Active search and rescue operations for subject Liam O'Connell were suspended at 1900 hours on the third operational day. The decision was made based on the diminishing probability of survival and the increasing risk to SAR personnel. My eyes scanned down to the concluding line, the official reason that would be entered into the permanent record, the story that would be told to the press and to Liam's family. Primary contributing factors for mission suspension: hazardous terrain and the forecast of deteriorating weather conditions. Deteriorating weather conditions. I remembered the perfectly clear sky, the sea of stars that had been blotted out only by the sheer walls of the canyon. A flash flood in a drought, hazardous terrain. The lies were identical, a template of plausible deniability passed down through generations of rangers who had looked into the same abyss. This piece of paper was the lock on the door, the final redaction that kept the world sane. Maya placed a pen on top of the report. It was an invitation, an induction. "Your signature is required," she said, her voice quiet but firm. As the last ranger on the scene, my hand trembled as I reached for the pen. This was it, the price of my survival, the cost of the knowledge I now carried. To sign this paper was to become complicit, to build the wall of the lie one brick higher. It was to abandon the man I used to be, the detective who believed every crime could be solved, every fact brought to light. The truth was that some doors once opened had to be sealed shut, not for the sake of a cover-up, but for the containment of a reality that would break the world. With a shuddering breath, I signed my name on the line. The scratching of the pen on the paper was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I had just signed my first official lie. As I let go of the pen, I felt the immense, crushing weight of that signature settle onto my soul. It was a burden I would carry for the rest of my life, a silent testament to the things that hunt in the dark, just beyond the edge of the map, and the unwritten rules that keep them there. A year can change a man. It can grind down the sharp edges of his certainty, leaving behind something quieter, harder, and more watchful. The seasons had turned, burying the memory of Liam O'Connell under a blanket of winter snow, and then a riot of summer wildflowers. But the change in me was permanent. I still did the work, logged the reports, and patrolled the trails. But a part of me was always listening, always watching the slant of the afternoon light. The mountains no longer look like simple rock and timber. They look like a resting beast, its breathing slow and deep. The radio crackled, the sound as familiar and unwelcome as a recurring nightmare. All units, be advised, we have a 211, Sector 9, missing hiker, vehicle located at the Twin Lakes trailhead. I felt a cold, familiar stillness settle over me. In the main briefing room, the big topographic map was already spread across the table. Maya Singh stood at its head, her expression as steady and unyielding as the granite peaks she managed. David was there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. He looked at me, a flicker of shared understanding passing between us. The rookies, 3 of them, fresh-faced and full of academy confidence, were gathered around the map, their eagerness a stark contrast to the weariness in the room. It was my turn to lead the initial briefing. I picked up a grease pencil, the plastic cool against my skin. "All right, listen up," I began, my voice clear and even, a practiced calm that felt like a carefully constructed mask. Our subject is a female, age 24, last seen yesterday morning. Her intended route was the High Loop Trail. The clock started when her car was found this morning. We are in the first 24. I laid it all out for them, the official protocols, the grid assignments, the comms plan, the air support schedule. I spoke their language, the language of procedure and probability. I talked about the golden 72 hours, the critical window where hope was still a viable operational strategy. I saw them nodding, soaking it in, their faces alight with the focused intensity of the hunt. I saw myself in them. I saw the man I was before I'd gone down into the canyon. When I finished, I capped the pencil. "Gear up. We deploy in 15. As the room began to clear, a flurry of motion and clipped conversations, I said, "Seasonal Rangers." A moment. The 3 rookies stopped, turning back to me. The rest of the room emptied out, leaving just the 4 of us, with David, a silent sentinel by the door. I waited until the noise died down, until the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "What I just gave you was the official plan," I said, my voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. "It's the one we follow. It's the one that goes in the report. But there's another rule. It's not in any manual, but it is the most important one you will ever learn out here." I looked at each of them in turn, letting the weight of my words sink in. One of them, a young man named Evans with sharp, intelligent eyes, had the same look of skeptical impatience I once wore. "We have 3 days," I continued, 72 hours. At the end of the 3rd day, when the sun touches that western ridge, this operation is over. Not suspended. Over. All personnel, no matter where you are or what you think you found, will be back at this station before the last light is gone. Evans shifted his weight. "With all due respect, sir," he started, his voice full of the certainty of the uninitiated. "What if we have a positive sign? A response to a call-out? A visual? Official SAR protocol is to exhaust all viable leads." I met his gaze and I didn't argue. I didn't tell him about impossible voices or lights that lie. I didn't show him the redacted file. I just let him look at me. I let him see the geography of the canyon etched into the lines around my eyes. I let him see the ghost of the man I used to be and the cold, hard certainty of the man who had survived. I explained without ever explaining. The confidence in his eyes wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, and then a dawning, uneasy understanding. He saw something in my face that was more convincing than any argument. He fell silent. "There are no exceptions," I said, my voice as flat and final as a closing tomb. "This is not a debate. This is the rule that keeps you safe. Now go get your gear." They filed out of the room, quiet and subdued. David pushed himself off the wall and gave me a single, slow nod. The watch had been passed. I turned and looked out, the large window, at the vast, indifferent wilderness. The search was beginning, the clock was ticking, the cycle was starting again, and I was now one of its keepers, a guardian of the boundary between the known world and the things the park intended to keep. We began with the seemingly heartless protocol of abandoning a search, a rule that goes against every instinct to save a life. Now we see it's not a rule of abandonment, but one of containment, a heavy responsibility passed down in silence. The story reminds us that the deepest shadows are cast not by the setting sun, but by the knowledge one must carry alone. It's the necessary lie told to protect a world that must never know what it is being protected from. If these are the kinds of stories that stay with you, the ones that echo in the quiet, consider subscribing to Silent Whispers. We value these explorations into the unseen and unheard. For this story, we'd love to read your thoughts on this. Knowing the risks and the unofficial warnings, if you were Ben in that moment, would you have breached protocol for that flicker of light? Thank you for lending us your time. Be well until we speak again. We're left to wonder what other stories are hidden in those redacted files, and what happens when an entity that has been kept finds a way to wander beyond the park's boundaries.